There are stories that nations bury. Stories too horrific, too shameful, too unspeakable to be included in textbooks or memorials. This is one of them. A place so vile that even its creators refused to give it a name of horror. Instead, they called it a number, Unit 731. What happened behind the barbed wire fences of a frozen compound in Manchuria was not science. It was evil masquerading in a lab coat. And yet, those responsible were never punished. In fact, many lived long, quiet lives. Some became national heroes. Others taught in medical schools. This is their story, and the story of the thousands who never made it out alive. Chapter 1. The birth of a monster. After Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, it began establishing what it saw as a scientific empire. To the outside world, this meant modernization, railways, education. But hidden in the shadows of Harbin, a city in Japanese-occupied northeast China, a dark experiment was just beginning. In 1936, Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, a Harvard-educated microbiologist and surgeon in the Imperial Japanese Army, was granted unprecedented control over a secret research facility. It would be called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. But that was a lie. The real purpose of this base, known internally as Unit 731, was simple: to create biological weapons and to test them on live human beings. Chapter 2. Who were the logs? Inside the walls of Unit 731, people weren't people. They were referred to as maruta, Japanese for logs. The term was chosen to help researchers emotionally detach from their victims. They weren't subjects. They were materials. Firewood. Tools to be consumed. The victims, primarily Chinese civilians, peasants, farmers, children, entire families. But they also included Korean rebels, Soviet prisoners of war, and possibly a few Allied soldiers, including Americans, Australians, and British, whose presence remains controversial and murky even today. Most were kidnapped. Others were lured under false pretenses. Some were handed over by the military. Once inside Unit 731, there was no way out. Chapter 3. The Experiments. What followed defies comprehension. Behind locked doors, thousands of men, women, and children were experimented on without anesthesia, because pain was part of the data. Vivisections doctors performed live dissections, cutting open conscious prisoners to observe how organs functioned while still pumping blood. Lungs, livers, stomachs, removed piece by piece. Some had their limbs amputated and reattached to opposite sides. Frostbite labs. Others were sent to frostbite chambers, rooms chilled to sub-zero temperatures. Prisoners' limbs were submerged in ice water until skin froze solid. Then they were struck with hammers to determine how much trauma dead flesh could endure before shattering. Disease infection. Subjects were forcibly infected with plague, typhus, cholera, anthrax, and syphilis. Some were injected. Others were forced to drink tainted liquids. Entire bodies would be blackened with infection, oozing pus as the diseases consumed them from within. Biological bomb testing. Unit 731's goal wasn't just torture, it was weaponization. Prisoners were tied to stakes in open fields and bombed with ceramic canisters filled with plague-infected fleas. Others were sprayed with chemicals to observe the spread of contagion. Japanese scientists meticulously documented the effects. Some villages were even deliberately exposed to weaponized plague, killing thousands of civilians to test the effectiveness of germ bombs. Chapter 4. The Science of Death. Shiro Ishii saw himself as a pioneer, a man whose brutal work would save Japanese lives on the battlefield. He believed that if Japan could perfect germ warfare, they could destroy entire armies without firing a single bullet. His philosophy: the weak perish, the strong prevail. He built a system of subunits and satellite camps, Unit 100, Unit 1644, and others. Each conducted variations of the same monstrous experiments: starvation, forced pregnancy, dehydration, pressure chambers, gas exposure. Researchers were encouraged to innovate. Promotions were tied to performance. Some scientists developed their own specialty methods. disembowelment while conscious, brain drilling, eye removal. There was no shortage of creativity, only a shortage of conscience. Chapter 5. The daily life inside. Prisoners lived in cement cells with no windows. Many were chained to walls. Some had limbs removed over time, used again and again for testing until they were no longer of use. Guards treated them like animals. Pregnant women were raped and infected deliberately to study disease in fetuses. Children were starved. Infants dissected. Once a subject died, their body was usually burned. The smoke from Unit 731's crematoriums rose daily into the sky. Faint gray tendrils that carried no name, no memory, no graves. Chapter 6. The world outside knew nothing. While Nazi Germany marched into Poland and France, and the U.S. debated entering the war, Unit 731 continued its gruesome work in silence. There were no cameras, no reporters, no Red Cross inspections. Japan's own population didn't know. The emperor was never officially informed, and even the soldiers stationed nearby assumed it was a water treatment plant. Only a few whispers escaped. A Chinese peasant who survived a test bomb attack. A Russian who saw bodies dumped into a ravine. But in wartime, such whispers were drowned by the roar of tanks and fighter planes. Chapter 7. Testing on entire villages in 1940, Japanese bombers dropped plague-infected fleas on Chinese cities like Ningbo and Changde, triggering uncontrollable epidemics. Entire communities were quarantined. Thousands died. Many who survived were arrested and taken back to Unit 731 for autopsy and further testing. The numbers are staggering. Over 300,000 people may have died as a direct result of Japan's biological warfare program. And still, no one stopped it. Chapter 8. The war ends and justice evaporates. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Unit 731 burned its records, destroyed its labs, and killed all surviving prisoners. Witnesses said the smoke from the incinerators was thicker than ever. Shiro Ishii and his top staff disappeared. When American intelligence finally uncovered the truth about Unit 731, they didn't bring justice. Instead, they made a deal. In exchange for complete access to Japan's biological warfare data, the data collected from human torture, the United States granted full immunity to every scientist involved. Not one was tried for war crimes. Not one was punished. Chapter 9. What happened to the monsters? Shiro Ishii lived quietly in Tokyo under U.S. protection. He died in 1959 of throat cancer, never facing a trial. Other doctors took high-ranking jobs in Japan's medical, academic, and industrial sectors. One became president of the Japan Medical Association. Another became governor of Tokyo. Some even lectured on ethics in post-war universities. Meanwhile, the families of their victims remained silent, forgotten in the pages of unspoken history. Chapter 10. The cover-up that lasted decades. Japan refused to acknowledge Unit 731 for decades. It wasn't taught in schools. Victims were dismissed as communist lies. No apology was ever issued by the government. It wasn't until the 1980s, when several Unit 731 veterans confessed on their deathbeds, that the full story began to emerge. Their confessions were published in obscure medical journals and interviews. Chilling, vivid, undeniable. China opened a museum at the original site of Unit 731 in Harbin, but in Japan, denials continued. To this day, the subject remains controversial. Chapter 11. Why this still matters. Unit 731 is not ancient history. It's recent, real, and chilling. It's a reminder of how quickly humans, educated, respected, even brilliant ones, can become monsters when given power without oversight. It shows how science, when stripped of morality, becomes a weapon. And perhaps most disturbingly, it shows how powerful nations are willing to cover up atrocities when it suits their political agenda. The final warning. There were no trials, no reparations, no justice, but there are still stories, still evidence, still names. And as long as we remember them, the victims of Unit 731 are not truly forgotten. If you believe this story should be known, share it. History isn't propaganda. It's a warning, one we ignore at our own peril. Subscribe for more true, unfiltered history. And in the comments, tell us, how do you think the world should remember Unit 731?